With the most recent Deadlock patch, we probably saw the biggest change to how souls work in Deadlock ever since I've been in the playtest. I've been in the playtest since about May 21st or 22nd, I don't remember the exact date, and I have yet to see another economy change that has been as impactful as the ones that we've seen in the last couple of days. So I'm going to put the change over the screen so we can talk about it a little bit. But on Thursday, in the update, they decided to make soul sharing duplicate souls even after the laning stage. So what that means is that in the laning stage, if you're in a dual lane, you would always duplicate souls. So let's say that you had, two people, you would both get the full value for a soul, right? And they decided to make that last the whole game. Now, what are the effects of this? Well, the first thing is, obviously, this just gives a whole lot more souls to everybody. And we can see this looking at your own games. You'll be able to see this as well. But if we take my games, for example, let's take a game that was played on the 6th here, this game. And if we look at the souls, this was a fairly even game. Like, there's never like a huge disparity. At 20 minutes here, one team had 120k, the other team had 125k. So this is roughly the state of the game at 20 minutes. Now, if we look at a recent game, for example, this Mirage game right here, at 20 minutes, one team has 135k, and then the other team has 144k. So this means that roughly we've seen an increase of, if we average it out, of about like 20,000 souls at 20 minutes, or roughly 1,000 souls per minute per team, which is very, very significant. So if you divide that by the 6 players that there are on a team, you're looking at, I think 160, 170 souls per minute extra. So where the goal before was maybe to reach 100 souls per minute, 1,000 souls per minute, right? Like that was the benchmark a lot of people were setting for themselves. Well, the benchmark now is probably closer to 1,200 souls per minute just because of the change. Now, it's important to mention that they are actively working on this, so we don't really know what's going to happen exactly. And I'll put this other change on the screen, but just yesterday, they reworked the formula again after, I think, a decent amount of complaining, and not necessarily complaining, but criticism from players such as myself, and I think the community in general wasn't necessarily the biggest fan. Now, what does this mean for Deadlock, and how should you use this change in order to impact the way that you play? So let's talk a bit about how it was before the update. So before the update, at 8 minutes, soul sharing would stop. So soul sharing would stop. And what that meant is you would no longer duplicate souls if you were in a dual lane. Now, at 8 minutes, what you wanted to do in those scenarios is you wanted to have one person per lane, and ideally no more than that, right? If you had any more than that, it was kind of inefficient. And so it wasn't necessarily bad, but if you had more than one person per lane, you really wanted to make sure that it was worth it, right? So if you had more than one person per lane, you wanted to be like pushing a tower or getting kills or doing something that's important on the map and not just farming. Because if you were just farming, it was inefficient. What this encouraged is it made farming the jungle at 8 minutes very valuable, and it made heroes, for example, like 7 that can farm the jungle very quickly, quite valuable because the laning stage had become a little bit slower and you didn't want a lot of people in your lanes, which made it so junglers were, fairly strong, and the meta was mostly, hey, early game, you focus on your game, you try to get towers, but you're going to have 1 or 2 people that are going to be just doing the jungle so that you can get the most, the highest soul efficiency possible. How has that changed? Well, now this is no longer in effect, and what happens is that now it goes with the latest update, it goes from a split of 100-100. So this is what happens pre 8 minutes, to a split of 100 if you're alone, to I believe it is 70-70, right? So what this means, and I found a chart on Reddit that I'll put up on the screen so you guys can kind of look at the comparison. What this means is that if you're alone, you'll get 100 souls. So if you have one person, they'll get 100 souls. If you have 2 people, you'll get a total of 140 souls. So both people will get 70% of the value, of the maximum value, which would be 100. 100 is just a theoretical number, by the way. I'm not, using actual numbers, although it's not that far from this. So let's say you've got 2 people, you'd get 140 souls for that creep, and then I'll put it on the screen, but the formula kind of follows, right? So the more people you have in a lane, to an extent, the more you get from a creep overall, but the value does get shared among people, right? So you can see that from two or three people, there's not really a big difference. And then the more people you have, the less total value you get, with I believe 6 people giving you something like 1.32. Just to clarify the numbers you're seeing on the screen, where it says old per player versus new per player, just to clarify, the old and the new are actually both in the last couple of days. It's just that they recently came out with a patch on Sunday that actually kind of nerfed the soul sharing, because before Sunday, you would basically, as long as you had multiple people in a lane, you would get a lot more souls, and now they kind of nerfed that a little bit. And the reason for that is quite simple, is that they wanted to nerf the death balling meta that we had kind of gotten into, which was, hey, the jungle is not really that valuable because the jungle has been reduced by 5%. You get a lot of souls for having people in lanes. And so, you know, a lot of things were kind of devalued on the map, and it kind of simplified the game to the point where it was just like, hey, just like farm lanes and play together as a team, and nothing else really matters that much. What about now? Where are we at now after the changes? So I haven't played hundreds of games since the changes. I mean, they happened yesterday. But what I can tell you is that we're now at a much more middle ground where it's going to be encouraging pushing, right? You're going to be encouraging pushing, but there's also going to be a positive to being solo. So before, there was really no reason to be solo ever, because if you had 2 people, they would both get the full value. So before, this was bad, and this is one of the big issues that I had with it, was the fact that since being solo was bad, if you were split pushing in the mid game, let's say you were playing a hero like Wraith or Haze, or heroes that can kind of get on the sidelines and pressure objectives, or even Mirage, right? What you were doing was kind of bad, because it would have been just straight up better to do it with 2 people, because you both would have gotten the full value, and it felt like it was devaluing a part of the game that had been in the game for a long time and was an interesting part of MOBAs, which is split pushing. So split pushing was kind of bad unless you were doing it with 2 people. Now, split pushing alone has a purpose once again, which is to get the most amount of souls, right? So you get here the most souls if you do this. This is the highest source of souls because you get 100% of the value of the souls. If you have 2 people, yeah, both people get 75%. I know I said 70 earlier, but it was 75, so my bad on the numbers. But both people get 75%, meaning that you get a total of 150%, but the souls are split between 2 people, so you don't get the most souls to 1 person. So being 2 in a lane still is the most efficient for souls overall on a team, but considering that this is a MOBA, there are generally going to be people that are going to use those souls better than others, although this MOBA is still, in development. Let's talk about how this affects you. The average Deadlock player are probably slightly better than average. I know from my Discord that people that watch me tend to be, above average in terms of ranks. So let's talk about how this can impact your games and how you should be playing a little bit differently with this change. So the first thing is, what is the goal of this change? And the main goal of this change is they want faster games. Whether we agree with it or not, this is the main goal. So they want to speed up the game. If there's more souls in the games are going to go faster. You guys have probably witnessed this happen in your own games. I've witnessed this happen in my own games. At first, I wasn't really sure how much that was going to speed up the game, but I've had a lot more 20-minute games with this patch than I have before. And 20-minute games happened before for me, but it's quite rare, whereas now it's fairly common, because if you have more souls, then overall you can kind of like close out the game quicker, hit your timings faster, do mid-boss faster, etc. The second thing is that earn is actually worth less. So I'm going to put a little down arrow. So the earn stocks are going down. And the reason for that is because since there are more souls available on the rest of the map, and the earn has not received any buffs in terms of the amount of souls it gives, it's now more worthless than it was before. So before it wasn't worthless, but the first earn was already considered to be kind of like a nice to have, but it wouldn't really dictate the game because it was kind of a small amount of souls overall. And now I would say that's even more true, because if you have to dedicate a good amount of resources to getting the earn safely, well, you're going to be losing out on a lot of lane farm, and lane farm gives more than it did before, even after the fix yesterday. And so overall, earn has been devalued, and the same can be said for like towers in general, right? Towers have also been devalued because their gold bounty or their soul bounty has not been adjusted. And on top of that, neutrals, aka the jungle, have been kind of double devalued because not only did their bounty not go up, their sharing hasn't been reworked at all, and they also got like a minus 5%, right? So considering they got a minus 5%, they didn't get any buffs, and now you just get more money from lane creeps in general as a team. At the end of the day, neutrals are pretty much just like much less important than they were before. So urns, towers, and neutrals all got devalued in terms of the soul bounty that they got. Now, this doesn't mean that towers are worthless or that the urn is worthless. One thing that kind of redeems them is the urn gives AP. It gives 1 AP. And towers, they give flex, right? So since towers give flex and the urn give 1 AP, it's still valuable. It's not completely worthless, but just know that there is a little bit less emphasis to this. Now, as far as how you should play around this, what I would recommend is that faster games equal tempo, right? So what this means is that super greedy builds are probably going to be less favorable in this meta, right? So you're going to want to be playing builds that come online fairly quickly. You don't want builds that are super greedy or that are reliant on a bunch of 6200 items. Or for example, I know back in the day, maybe like a month and a half ago, or maybe even 2 months ago, people were playing Haze rushing Ricochet and just going for like super farm Haze. I'm going to rush Ricochet and then go ult build, for example, and I'll be online at like 25 minutes. And at that point, I'll kind of be the raid boss. Builds like that are going to be less effective now than they were before, because now being able to contest the map, contest the lanes, and be together on the map and take fights is a lot more important than it was as far as the souls go. This might change in the future, but this is the case right now. However, on the other hand, you have more money in general. This means that if your hero was reliant on a specific item to get going, well, now he gets access to the item significantly faster than before. I would say about probably 15 to 20% faster, depending on what you're looking at. So this is a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it feels like heroes that kind of struggled to get items, but were really good and perhaps were lacking a little bit of tempo, got buffed. For example, one thing we found out about Dynamo as a hero is Dynamo kind of needed unstoppable, right? You kind of needed to use your ultimate right here in order to kind of get things going, and without your ultimate you were very vulnerable, right? But now you get a ton of money, which means that it's much easier to get unstoppable refresher on Dynamo, and you'll get those maybe 15-20% faster than you would have before. However, the entire pace of the game has sped up, but getting an early unstoppable is still easier than it was, which makes Dynamo stronger. So there's different effects that apply to different characters about this, right? Not every character benefits the same from this patch. For example, I felt that Lash, which is already a tempo hero, feels very, very strong. And Lash is kind of one of those heroes that tends to fall off a little bit in the late game. But now the late game kind of is just faster in general. You don't really get to that same state as you got before. And so I feel like Lash is stronger because of these changes, right? And so I invite you guys to think about all the different heroes and how you play them and kind of how they fare in this patch, because there's a lot of different impacts that we don't really know yet. And they're testing things with the economy, which I love, but we don't really know all of the impacts that it's going to have yet. The other thing I want to point out is in the item category. Now I'm going in the item shop to look at an item that's no longer here. Rest in peace, Soul Rebirth. So Soul Rebirth was removed. I wanted to talk about it a little bit. Why was it removed? Well, there's a couple of reasons, but I think the main reason why it was removed is because it became a mandatory item in the late game. And now this might not have been true for you guys' game yet, but in Eternus lobbies and tournament play, etc., once it got to 30 minutes, it basically became the race to who could have the most Soul Rebirths quicker. So if you had a team with 6 Soul Rebirths and the other team had 2, the team with 6 Soul Rebirths would look to take a fight as fast as possible because they knew they were going to win the fight, or they were very likely to win it just because of the sheer amount of Soul Rebirths they had. It was one of those items where kind of everyone bought it. It became super strong because you just had like an entire team that had a second life. So I'm really glad it was removed. I think it's great for the health of the game, and I think overall it's a great change. So that's it for me, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video about the state of the game. I think that overall, well, it's not really the state of the game, but more so how the patch affected gameplay. We've got faster games, faster economy, more tempo based. Grouping is a little bit more encouraged. And I believe that as far as how this affects you, just keep in mind that objectives and urns, etc., are just worth a little bit less, and that fights are going to be worth a little bit more. So don't be willing to throw away your life necessarily as easily as you would have before for objectives, and just keep this in mind and try to go for builds that aren't too greedy and be more active on the map early on. Prioritize lanes, prioritize objectives, and don't really highly prioritize the jungle. It's still important to farm it when you can, but it's not a high priority and will probably not be the direction the game is going into, especially considering the jungle has such long respawn timers. I think that the vision they have for the jungle in this game is quite different from other MOBAs, and it's not going to be as high of a priority. I hope you guys enjoyed this video with the blackboard and all that stuff. It's a bit of a new style for me. I'm really bad at editing videos, and so I'm trying to make it so we have videos that are interesting and that you guys like without having a ton of editing in them, but also making it so the content is engaging when most of my stuff is talking about theoretical things or things that can help you improve at the game, which sometimes can be hard to demonstrate with a visual element to them. All right, that's it, guys. Have a wonderful day.